Zach and I had been friends since college, years of inside jokes, road trips, and late-night talks that made our bond feel more like family than friendship. So when we were both invited to a mutual friend's wedding in a rural town in Wyoming, it was a no-brainer to go together. The couple had decided to get married in their hometown, a remote, almost forgotten farming community surrounded by endless plains and groves of trees. It was inconvenient, sure, miles from the nearest airport, barely a blip on the map. But who were we to complain? It was their day. We booked an Airbnb a few miles outside of town, tucked into the countryside. Zach offered to drive us across a few states. He liked long drives. I liked watching the land unfold around us like an old photograph. The trip was mostly uneventful, just hours of road and sky and the occasional roadside diner. We finally arrived around dusk, the sun setting low behind the swaying grasslands. The farmhouse was more isolated than we expected. It sat at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by fields that seemed to stretch into oblivion. There were no nearby homes, no neighbors, not even a hint of civilization beyond the pale gravel path we had arrived on. The house itself was modest. 2 stories, white paint chipped with age, a front porch with a creaky swing swaying in the wind. It had that old, worn charm, like something from a postcard faded by time. A barn loomed in the distance, empty and leaning slightly, as though gravity had begun to whisper secrets into its structure. We parked and unloaded, the only sounds being our footsteps on the wooden porch and the distant rustle of trees. Inside, the house was basic but comfortable. The furniture had clearly been there for decades, but it was clean, and the place smelled faintly of cedar and old books. Zach and I chose separate rooms, his at the end of the hall, mine just across from it. We spent the rest of the day unwinding, talking about the wedding, about life, about how strange it felt to be so far removed from everything. By 11 p.m., we were in bed. I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. There was something about the stillness of the place that made me uneasy. No cars passing by, no city noise to cradle my thoughts. Just silence. Vast, pressing silence. Eventually, I drifted off. The next morning was beautiful. Blue skies, a crisp breeze, and the scent of wildflowers in the air. The wedding itself was lovely, intimate, emotional, and full of heartfelt speeches and laughter. We stayed until late, dancing and catching up with people we hadn't seen in years. It was close to 10 p.m. when we made our way back to the Airbnb, tired but content. Zach went to bed almost immediately. I, on the other hand, decided to stay in the living room for a bit longer. I wanted a moment to unwind in the quiet, maybe scroll through my phone or read a few pages of a book. I was just beginning to relax when I heard it. A soft, single knock on the front door. It was so quiet, I almost thought I imagined it. I stood up slowly. Something about it unsettled me. A knock this late at night in a place so far from any other homes? I approached the door cautiously, heart starting to beat just a little faster. I peered through the peephole. No one was there. Still, I opened the door a crack and looked around. The porch was empty. The driveway, blanketed in moonlight, showed no sign of anyone. I stepped out briefly, the wooden boards groaning beneath me. Wind rustled the tall grass. Nothing else. I shut the door and locked it, telling myself it must have been the house settling. Old homes make strange noises. Zach was probably asleep and hadn't heard a thing. I returned to the couch. Then it happened again. Another knock, but this time from the back of the house. I jumped up, heart racing now. That wasn't the house. Couldn't be. The sound was too deliberate, too localized. I hurried through the house and turned on the back porch light. The bulb flickered on, casting a pale cone of light into the backyard that extended toward the tree line. Nothing, but the feeling didn't leave. In fact, it grew. A thick, crawling sensation beneath my skin. I stared into the darkness for minutes, longer than I realized. The forest beyond the property was shrouded in shadows, impenetrable and still. I wanted to believe no one was out there, but the silence seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something. Eventually, I made myself walk back to my room. I kept the light on a while longer. When I finally drifted into sleep, it was restless, full of fragments of dreams I couldn't remember. I woke suddenly. Someone was knocking on my bedroom door. Not loud, but urgent. I sat up, heart pounding. "Hello," I called out, voice dry. "Hey, it's me," came Zach's voice from the other side. "Come out for a second." Relieved, I got up and opened the door. Zach stood in the hallway, pale and shaken. His eyes darted around like he was expecting something to jump out at him. "What's going on?" I asked. He swallowed hard. "I woke up to sounds outside my window. I looked out, and there was a man, just walking slowly around the house. I only saw his back. He turned the corner before I could get a better look. My stomach turned to ice. Before I could say anything else, we both heard it. Clicking sounds. From the front door. Like metal on metal. Like someone working a lock. We ran into the living room. There he was. A man, tall, lean, dressed in dark clothing. Stood on the porch with his body pressed against the door. His head was bowed. Hands moving quickly near the doorknob. It was clear he was trying to pick the lock. Zach looked at me. I didn't need to say anything. He ran for his room to call the police. I stayed, my body frozen but my hands holding the lock from inside. It was all I could think to do. The man outside paused for a moment, as if frustrated. Then, without warning, he bolted off the porch and disappeared around the side of the house. We didn't follow. We locked ourselves in Zach's room and waited, every creak of the floorboards outside tightening the fear in our chests. The minutes stretched. The silence became unbearable. When the police arrived nearly an hour later, we were shaken, exhausted, and still hiding. They searched the area but found nothing. No footprints, no signs of forced entry, no clues. Just a patch of disturbed grass by the window Zach had looked out of. That was it. We left first thing in the morning. Packed in silence. Drove in silence. I couldn't stop thinking about it. If the sounds I heard earlier, those knocks, were from him, then he'd been watching the house for hours. He knew people were inside. He didn't care. And that's what haunts me. Not just the fear of someone trying to break in, but the intent, the patience, the calmness. He was waiting, not to rob us, not to steal, but to come inside while we were still there. And I don't know what would have happened if he had. Three years have passed since the night that still wakes me up in a cold sweat. At the time, I was in my early 20s. Ambitious, a little naive, and eager to land a position that could change the trajectory of my career. I had a job interview scheduled early the next morning in a neighboring city, a 3-hour drive from my apartment. The rational part of me said I could just leave early, hit the road before dawn, and make it on time. But the more practical side, exhausted from weeks of preparation, won out. I decided to rent an Airbnb for the night. It wasn't strictly necessary, but I wanted to be well-rested, alert, and ready. I left home around 4 p.m. and pulled into the driveway just after 7 o'clock. The neighborhood was quiet, lined with aging trees and well-kept houses with wide porches and tidy lawns. It looked like the kind of place where nothing bad ever happened. Birds chirped, sprinklers hissed. The sun was low, casting long, warm shadows over the street. The house itself was modest. 2 stories, painted beige with blue trim, the kind of place you'd expect a family of 4 to live in. I parked, got out, and carried my backpack and small suitcase to the front door. The key was waiting for me in the lockbox, just as the app said it would be. The moment I stepped inside, my heart nearly stopped. A woman appeared from around the corner of the hallway, just inside the living room. I physically flinched. My instincts screamed that she shouldn't be there. Airbnb listings are usually very clear. It's either a private room or an entire home. I had rented the entire home. Oh, she exclaimed, hand over her chest, as though I had startled her. You must be the guest. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. I blinked. Yeah. Sorry. I wasn't expecting anyone to be here. She smiled, an awkward sort of half smile. I'm just staying in the other half of the house for a few days. I thought I'd introduce myself, just so things aren't weird. I nodded slowly, trying to process what she'd said. Okay, I'm James, I offered, extending my hand. She took it. Her grip was surprisingly firm. Catherine, she said. Well, I'll let you get settled. She turned and walked back down the hallway, disappearing around a corner. I stood there in the entryway, adrenaline still buzzing in my chest. Something felt off. Not wrong exactly, just off. Like a puzzle piece jammed in the wrong place. I carried my bags into the room I assumed was meant for me and sat on the edge of the bed. Pulling out my phone, I opened the Airbnb app and navigated to the listing. No mention of a shared space. It clearly stated entire house. But when I looked again, I realized the pictures only showed one bedroom. There were no photos of the living room, the hallway, or even the kitchen. Just as I was about to message the owner, there was a soft knock at my door. It was Catherine again. Sorry, she said, smiling. I just thought I'd come say hi again. It's nice to have someone else in the house. I stepped into the doorway, trying to appear polite while silently wishing she'd go away. She launched into small talk, where I was from, what brought me here, what I did for work. I answered curtly, hoping she'd pick up on my disinterest. But if she noticed, she didn't show it. In fact, she started getting friendly, almost flirtatious. Her gaze lingered too long. Her body language was too relaxed, too casual. It was weird. I was exhausted. I hadn't even eaten. Eventually, I excused myself and closed the door behind me. I sent a quick message to the owner. Hi, just arrived. Is this supposed to be a shared rental? There's someone else here. Then I unpacked, made my way into the kitchen, and started preparing a sandwich with the groceries I'd picked up earlier. Just as I was spreading the mustard, I heard footsteps behind me. Catherine again. She leaned against the counter like she owned the place, eyes scanning me. Now that I had a better look at her, I noticed things I hadn't before. Her appearance wasn't just casual, it was disheveled. Her hair was greasy and uneven, like it had been hacked at with kitchen scissors. Her eyes were red-rimmed and glassy, shadowed by deep bags. Her smile was too wide, and it didn't reach her eyes. You know, she said, running a finger along the countertop, it gets pretty lonely here. Most people don't like to talk. You seem different. I forced a chuckle. I've just got a big interview in the morning. Probably going to turn in early. Want to see my room? She asked suddenly. It's got this huge mirror. Real old. Antique. You can see the whole house in it. I blinked, surprised. No thanks. I'm good. Her smile faltered. Oh, right. You're tired. She lingered a second too long before turning away and disappearing down the hall again. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A message from the Airbnb host. What do you mean someone else is there? There shouldn't be anyone in the house. Please call the police immediately. I stared at the screen. A chill spread across my spine, slow and cold, as if ice were being poured into my veins. I turned to the hallway, just in time to hear another door open somewhere down the hall. And then I heard footsteps, heavy ones. Not the light shuffle of Catherine's bare feet. This was someone else. The footsteps grew louder, faster, running. Without thinking, I bolted. I didn't grab my food. I didn't grab my phone. I didn't even close the front door behind me. I ran. Out the door, down the driveway to my car. As I fumbled for my keys, I glanced back toward the house and caught a glimpse of a man charging down the hallway. His face was pale. His mouth twisted in fury. I got into the car, locked the doors, and peeled out of the driveway. I didn't stop driving until I reached a gas station 20 miles out of town. By the time the police arrived at the Airbnb, both Catherine and the man were gone. No trace of them. No signs they had ever been there. The door to the other room was locked from the inside, but there was no one in it. Just an unmade bed, a few empty bottles, and the aforementioned mirror. An ornate, cracked thing that warped reflections. My belongings were still there, untouched, but somehow that made it worse. Like they had never planned to steal from me. They had planned something else. I never got an explanation. The owner was mortified, claimed he had no idea how anyone else had gotten in. Said the last guests had checked out 2 weeks before and there had been no bookings since. For weeks, I wondered, what would have happened if I had said yes? If I'd followed her into that room? If I'd looked into that mirror? Sometimes, late at night, I swear I still hear footsteps in the hallway, heavy, charging footsteps, just before I fall asleep. And when I wake up, sometimes I see a shape in the mirror across from my bed, just for a second, watching me. Four years ago, I rented an Airbnb for the Christmas holidays. I was going to spend the week with my family, so I picked a place just a few miles away from their house. Something convenient, familiar, and supposedly safe. The booking was straightforward, and when I arrived on December 20th, the house looked exactly like it had in the photos. An unremarkable, modest suburban home in a quiet neighborhood. The kind of place where nothing unusual ever happens. The sky was a dull gray, the winter cold creeping into my bones as I unlocked the front door and stepped inside around 6 p.m. The air was still and a little stale. It had clearly been empty for a while. The house smelled faintly of dust and something faintly chemical, like a cleaning product that hadn't quite aired out. I dropped my bags and let out a breath, glad to finally have a place to rest after my drive. That first evening, I wasn't in the mood to be social. I wanted nothing more than to unwind. So I stayed in, flicked on the TV, and did a little bit of work on my laptop, emails, some last-minute holiday planning, nothing too demanding. Around 10 p.m., I climbed into bed, the soft sheets and cool pillow offering a brief comfort from the lingering fatigue. But then, sometime in the dead of night, I woke up. I was groggy, caught between sleep and wakefulness, but there was a faint noise. A series of soft thumps, coming from downstairs. It was almost rhythmic, like someone tapping lightly against the wall. I lay still, heart fluttering just a little, but the sound didn't fill me with fear. I told myself it was probably the house settling, or maybe the heating system kicking on. Old houses make noises. I didn't check the time. I didn't get out of bed. I just listened for a minute before drifting back into sleep. That was the last I remember hearing that night. The next morning, the memory of those noises was already fading, swallowed by the bright sunlight filtering through the curtains and the promise of seeing my family. I called them to let them know I had arrived safely, and we made plans for dinner later that week. I spent most of the day relaxing in the Airbnb, reading and sipping coffee, trying to push the weirdness of the previous night to the back of my mind. Then came the evening when things took a turn. I grabbed my bag and keys, ready to head out to my parents' house for our Christmas dinner. As I opened the front door, I was suddenly face to face with a man standing on the porch. Just standing there. No warning. No knock. No ring of the doorbell. My heart slammed in my chest. The man was average height, wearing a dark jacket and jeans, his face partially obscured by a beanie pulled low over his forehead. His eyes met mine, cold and unreadable. I couldn't even react at first. I just froze, staring back at him. "Can I help you?" I managed to ask. He didn't say a word. Instead, he nodded once, then turned and walked away, down the porch steps onto the sidewalk and disappeared down the street. It was chilling. The sheer audacity of someone just standing at my door, my temporary home, without any explanation. How long had he been there, I wondered. Why hadn't he knocked? What had he been waiting for? I locked the door and hurried to my car, feeling a sudden rush of unease. At dinner, I told my family what happened, and they agreed it was unsettling. Still, we tried to enjoy the night, laughing and catching up on life. But no matter how hard I tried, my mind kept drifting back to that stranger. Did he have any connection to this Airbnb? Had he been watching me? What if he had tried to break in while I was asleep? I left the dinner around 9 p.m., saying I wasn't feeling well. I needed to get back and check the house, the place I was supposed to be safe in. 15 minutes later, I was pulling into the driveway, the night pressing down around me like a weight. The streetlights flickered faintly, casting long shadows over the silent houses. I looked around carefully, scanning for any signs that someone else had been there while I was gone. Nothing. No footprints, no disturbed plants, no broken windows. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the creak of the floorboards loud in the quiet. I dropped my keys and bag on the kitchen counter, then paused as I heard it again. That same thump-thump noise I'd heard on the first night. But now it was louder, closer, unmistakably real. My breath hitched. The sound came from a door nearby, a heavy, solid door I hadn't really paid attention to before. It was the garage door. Heart pounding, I moved closer, every step slower than the last. Suddenly, another loud thump sounded, right next to me, as if someone was banging on the other side of the door. I jumped back, adrenaline flooding my veins. Then the worst, a faint, ragged sound of heavy breathing, desperate and labored, came from behind the door. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my keys, bolted for my car, and locked the doors behind me. I called 911 with trembling hands. When the police arrived, I watched from the driveway as they searched the house. Minutes later, they came back outside, their faces grave. The garage door was the point of entry, one officer explained. There are signs someone tried to break the lock. Scratches, dents, evidence of forced entry. My blood ran cold. Unknown to me, the previous renters or owners had left a side door connecting to the garage unlocked, a small detail that had allowed whoever was there easy access. I never planned to use the garage, so I never checked it. Was the man I saw on the porch the same person who had been trapped in the garage, trying to get inside while I slept? I didn't know, and that unknown gnawed at me. What had they intended to do if they got in? Steal? Harm? I didn't want to think about it. After that night, I didn't return to the Airbnb. I spent the rest of the week in a hotel, trying to shake the lingering sense of dread. Even now, for years later, I still find myself haunted by that experience, by the silence, the breathing, the thumps in the dark. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I swear I hear faint footsteps in my own house, or the whisper of someone watching from just beyond the door. The nightmare didn't end when I left that Airbnb. Followed me home. A few weeks ago, I decided to take a trip alone. The plan was simple. Rent an Airbnb townhouse in a small, quiet town close to some hiking trails I'd always wanted to explore. I didn't know much about the town, just that it was small, peaceful, and conveniently located for the trails. The drive was long, about 9 hours in total, but I was excited. I'd been needing to get away, to disconnect from my hectic city life, and I thought this would be perfect. When I finally arrived, it was already late in the evening. The townhouse was tucked away on a quiet residential street lined with similar-looking homes, all modest, somewhat worn down, but still charming in their own way. The house itself wasn't new, but it was cozy enough, the kind of place you might imagine settling into for a weekend getaway. I parked on the road and grabbed my bags, looking up at the dim streetlights casting long shadows over the pavement. I texted the host to let them know I'd arrived, since I hadn't seen any door passcode in my emails. I stood there on the porch, waiting. The silence was thick, interrupted only by the distant rustling of leaves and the occasional bark of a dog somewhere down the street. After a few minutes, I heard a door creak open nearby. A man appeared from around the corner, smiling warmly. He introduced himself as the Airbnb host, said he'd be right next door if I needed anything, and then left quickly, his footsteps fading into the night. The encounter felt a little off, unexpected, but nothing overtly strange. At least he didn't linger. Inside, I unpacked, setting my things carefully in the bedroom. The place had a musty smell, a mix of old wood and something faintly metallic. I brushed it off as the scent of an older home, nothing more. I explored the small living area, kitchen, and bathroom before collapsing into bed, exhausted from the long journey. The next day was sunny and clear. After a quick breakfast, I drove to the nearby trailhead. The hike was beautiful, winding through dense forests and along rocky ridges. For 4 hours, I lost myself in the peacefulness of nature, the sound of birds, the crunch of leaves underfoot. It was exactly the escape I'd hoped for. When I returned to the townhouse around 7 p.m., something felt wrong. At first, it was subtle. A picture frame slightly askew on the wall. A small stack of books on the nightstand nudged out of place. Nothing major was missing, but it was enough to make my skin crawl. I scanned the rooms carefully, checking cabinets, drawers, and doors. Everything was closed, nothing obviously disturbed. But the feeling lingered. Someone had been here. Had they come in while I was gone? I tried to push the thought away, blaming it on my imagination. It was a new place, unfamiliar territory. Anxiety could easily warp perception. I heated up a frozen meal and ate on the couch while watching YouTube videos on my phone. The house felt silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant creak of the old wooden floors settling. That night, sleep didn't come easy. The townhouse was a single-story layout, with the bedroom at the very end of a long hallway opposite the front door. I'm used to sleeping upstairs, so lying in bed on the ground floor felt strange. I kept drifting off only to snap awake moments later, caught in a loop of restless half-sleep. About an hour after lying down, I was awake, staring at the ceiling when I heard it. A soft creaking from the other end of the house. A door, slowly and deliberately opening. The sound was careful, measured, as if someone was trying to be as quiet as possible. My heart hammered in my chest. I sat up slowly, listening intently. Silence. Then, nothing. I cracked open my bedroom door just enough to peek out into the dim hallway, lit faintly by the porch light filtering through the front door's glass panel. That's when I noticed the front door was ajar, partially open. Cold dread washed over me. I closed and locked my door quietly, then moved to the far end of the room. I fumbled with my phone, dialing 911 as quietly as possible. While I was mid-call, I saw it. A shadow at the bottom of the door. The silhouette of a person standing just outside my bedroom, unmoving. My breath caught. I stopped talking, frozen in fear, waiting for whatever it was to move away. After what felt like an eternity, the shadow retreated silently down the hall. I resumed the call, whispering the situation to the operator. When the police arrived, they swept the townhouse thoroughly. They found footprints, muddy, fresh, scattered throughout the house. Clear evidence that someone had been inside while I was out hiking. Yet, nothing was stolen, no signs of forced entry. The front door being open was the only anomaly, but it seemed to have been left that way on purpose, without signs of a break-in. I found myself fixating on the Airbnb host. Could it have been him? But the officers found no proof to link him to any wrongdoing. He had the key, after all, and might have opened the door for maintenance or inspection. Yet, the timing of the shadow outside my bedroom late at night, when I was alone and vulnerable, suggested something else, something more sinister. Since that night, the memory haunts me. I replay every detail. The smile of the host, the silence in the house, the creak of that door, the shadow at my bedroom door. Was it someone with malicious intent? Or just a prankster, Or maybe a stalker who had been watching me since I arrived. I still don't know. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I hear a faint creak or whisper in the wind, and I wonder if they're still out there, waiting, watching, maybe planning to come back. The small town, the quiet street, the modest townhouse. They all seem to hide secrets beneath their peaceful facade. And I'm left wondering how close I came to something truly terrifying. Something I might never fully understand. If you ever stay somewhere unfamiliar, remember, some doors should never be left open, and some shadows should never be ignored. Last New Year's Eve started out with what should have been a simple, fun plan. Me and my two best friends, Jason and Christian, decided it would be a great idea to rent a house for the night. None of us were the type to enjoy huge parties, the loud music, the crowds, the chaos. Instead, we preferred quiet, intimate gatherings where we could really talk, laugh, and just be ourselves. Plus, all three of us lived in cramped dorm rooms at school, so having a whole house to ourselves felt like a rare luxury. Jason had found a place on Airbnb, a cabin on the outskirts of town. It wasn't fancy by any means, but it was cheap and secluded, which was perfect. I carpooled with Christian, and we arrived around noon. The cabin was exactly what you'd expect from a rustic getaway. All wooden walls and creaky floors, a small fireplace, and the smell of pine and aged timber. Around us were a handful of similar cabins, spaced far enough apart to give us a feeling of being alone in the woods, away from the noisy world. The inside was pretty bare bones. There was an old couch, a small kitchen, a couple of bedrooms, and a bathroom that looked like it hadn't been renovated in decades. But we weren't expecting luxury. We just wanted to hang out, play some video games, and enjoy the quiet company of good friends. The day passed lazily. We talked about everything: school, dreams, the upcoming year, while occasionally flipping through channels on the TV. Around 6 in the evening, Christian decided to go to the nearby convenience store for some snacks and drinks. Jason and I stayed behind in the living room, messing around with Jason's Nintendo Switch. Then, out of nowhere, there was a knock at the door. We both froze. The knock was slow, deliberate, and echoed unervingly in the quiet cabin. We exchanged a look. Who on earth would be knocking here? We were miles away from the nearest town, surrounded by nothing but trees and a few scattered cabins. Curious and cautious, I got up and walked over to the door. Peering through the peephole, I saw a man standing on the doorstep. He looked rough, disheveled hair, a hard expression, eyes that seemed filled with an angry fire. The door had one of those metal latches, so I flipped it over and cracked the door open just enough to talk. I wasn't about to open it fully for a stranger, but maybe it was the host or a neighbor with a problem. The man's glare hit me immediately, sharp and hostile. His lips curled into a scowl as he spoke in a low, harsh tone. "You need to be quiet tonight. Don't disturb the neighborhood," he said. His voice was stubborn, almost threatening, as if we had already been making noise. But that was impossible. We hadn't done anything out of the ordinary. No music, no yelling, no parties. And even if we had, the cabins were spaced far apart. There was no way he could have heard us from wherever he lived. I wanted to argue, but the man's angry energy was intimidating. So I said, "Sure," and closed the door in his face. But barely a second passed before he started banging on the door with a fist, hard and relentless. I glared at Jason. "This guy's nuts," I mouthed. We ignored the banging. After a moment, the sound stopped. When Christian came back, we told him what happened. He raised an eyebrow, half skeptical but also uneasy. The next few hours passed quickly. We watched a movie, played games, and tried to shake off the strange encounter. But as midnight approached, an uneasy feeling settled over us. Something wasn't right. Then we heard it, a loud thud from outside, like something heavy dropping to the ground. Then, A sharp, terrifying sound shattered the silence. Glass breaking. We jumped up and rushed to the window. Outside stood the same man from before. He was pacing around Christian's car, which was now covered in shards of broken glass. The windshield had been smashed completely. In his hand was a metal baseball bat, and his eyes burned with madness. He was muttering to himself, swinging the bat wildly, as if in a psychotic rage. Christian was furious. Without hesitation, he grabbed the door handle and stormed outside to confront the man. Jason and I rushed after him, desperate to stop what was clearly escalating into something dangerous. But before we even reached the doorway, a deafening gunshot cracked through the air. I froze. My heart pounded as I realized what had likely just happened. Then, miraculously, Christian sprinted back inside, slamming and locking the door behind him. More gunshots rang out, thudding against the wooden walls of the cabin. The madman banged the bat against the door, each strike sounding like a death knell. And then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he vanished into the darkness. The rest of the night was a blur. We called the police, who arrived quickly but found no trace of the man. Even more disturbing was what they uncovered afterward. The man wasn't a local. No one recognized him, no one knew where he came from, and there was no record of him living nearby. It was as if he had materialized out of thin air, a terrifying ghost haunting the edges of the woods. To this day, none of us know what triggered his violent outburst or why he targeted us. But one thing was clear. That night, we came face to face with something dangerous, unpredictable, and utterly insane. We had survived by a miracle. The cabin was cold inside, even with the small fireplace flickering weakly. The shadows on the wooden walls seemed to dance, twisting into shapes that resembled ghostly figures lurking just beyond the firelight. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it a haunting chill that seeped into our bones. Jason, usually the confident one, was visibly shaken. His usual easy smile was replaced with a tight jaw and restless eyes. Christian's anger, normally a source of protection for us, had morphed into something reckless. That night, rage made him reckless, willing to charge headfirst into danger without thought. And me? I was stuck in the middle, caught between fear and the urge to act, my mind racing with what-ifs and regrets. Why had we chosen this isolated cabin? Why had we thought this would be a safe escape from our everyday lives? The man's sudden appearance broke the fragile bubble of security we'd built. His angry demands for silence, his violent rampage against Christian's car, it felt like an invasion of something primal and dark. After the shooting, the silence that followed was worse than any noise. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet that pressed down on us, reminding us how close we had come to disaster. Couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every moment, wondering if I could have done something differently. Should I have answered the door more cautiously? Should we have left immediately? The cabin itself seemed to hold onto that night's terror. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps. Every shadow seemed to shift into the shape of that angry man. Weeks later, we still didn't know who he was or why he targeted us. The police report was vague, filled with speculation but no answers. No motive, no identity, and sometimes, when the wind howls just right, I swear I can hear the faint echo of that knock at the door. A reminder that some dangers lurk just beyond the light, waiting for the right moment to strike. I had reached a point in my life where monotony was suffocating me. I live in a flat, endless stretch of plains, a place so utterly devoid of character that even the sunsets seemed uninspired. Every day blended into the next, a dreary cycle of work, sleep, and mindless scrolling through social media. I craved an escape, a break from the predictable, the bland, the utterly forgettable. That's how I ended up deciding on a short vacation in Colorado, somewhere mountainous, covered in dense forests, with winding roads and rocky peaks towering over the horizon. I imagined crisp mountain air, the scent of pine trees, the sound of wildlife, and starry skies far from city lights. A fresh start, even if just for a few days. But my budget was tight. I couldn't afford Aspen or any of the flashy mountain towns everyone talked about. So I started digging deeper, searching for affordable Airbnbs in smaller, lesser-known towns. The options were slim and many still priced beyond what I could spend. Then, I stumbled on one listing that seemed decent enough. A tiny, 500-square-foot cabin nestled in a remote town, surrounded by forest and crumbling old buildings. The photos looked cozy, albeit a little weathered, but the price was right. I booked it. The week of the trip was a haze of anticipation mixed with unease. I didn't know much about this town, just a name, a dot on the map. But as I loaded my bags into the car and set off, the dull landscape behind me slowly gave way to the towering Rockies, their jagged peaks piercing the clouds. The drive was long, 10 hours of twisting mountain roads, thickening darkness, and a creeping sense that I was leaving the world behind. Night had fallen fully by the time I arrived, and the first glimpse of the town shattered whatever romantic ideas I'd had. Instead of a quaint mountain village, I found a few rows of houses lined along a lonely gravel road. The street was almost pitch black, lit only by the feeble glow of a flickering street lamp near the intersection. Old wooden power poles leaned precariously, their wires sagging like tired ropes. The houses looked tired, too, weather-beaten and forgotten. The air was colder than I expected, sharp and dry. It carried a faint, strange scent that I couldn't place. Something earthy, with a bitter undercurrent like rust or old blood. It set my nerves on edge. I shouldn't have been surprised to find such a place here, but it was more than I expected. This was not a mountain getaway. This was a ghost town. I drove slowly down the gravel road to a cul-de-sac where my Airbnb was supposed to be. The gravel crunched sharply under my tires, echoing through the night. The cabin sat among four other small houses, each one seeming to shrink back from the darkness like frightened animals. I parked and stepped out, my bags feeling heavier with every step. The cabin was smaller than I'd imagined, barely 500 square feet. Inside, the air was stale and smelled faintly of mildew and old wood smoke. Dust motes floated in the beam of my flashlight, swirling like tiny ghosts. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper peeling at the corners, and the furniture looked decades old, as if it had been left to rot. Still, the setup was functional. A tiny kitchen with chipped counters, a single bedroom with a lumpy mattress, and a living room with a cracked window overlooking the gravel road. I dropped my bags on the floor and went to fill my water bottle in the kitchen sink. That's when I heard the gravel crunching again outside. Another car, slowly rolling into the cul-de-sac. I froze and glanced out the kitchen window. A pair of headlights pierced the dark, moving steadily toward a house adjacent to mine. The car came to a stop and the lights went off, but no one emerged. I watched, heart pounding, as the car sat motionless. Who would be out here at this hour? And why just sit there in silence? After several minutes with no movement, I stepped back from the window, telling myself it was none of my business. I didn't want to seem paranoid. Maybe they were just neighbors, but unease settled in my chest like a stone. I pulled out my phone, checking messages and telling my family I'd arrived safely. Still, the strange feeling lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. I didn't stay up long that night. After unpacking a few things and brushing my teeth, I climbed into bed. My thoughts were restless, but exhaustion finally pulled me under. And then I woke. The room was pitch black except for the faint moonlight seeping through the thin curtains. My heart was racing for no clear reason. I tried to ignore the unsettling silence, the kind of stillness that feels alive. That's when I saw it. Two glowing eyes pressed against the window. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The eyes stared directly at me, unblinking, cold, filled with something malevolent I couldn't name. The figure stepped back, vanishing into the night. I strained my ears and heard slow, cautious footsteps retreating, but not retreating far enough. The sound faded, but never fully left. Panic surged. I leapt out of bed and started dressing quickly. Then, footsteps appeared again. Heavy, deliberate, right outside my bedroom door. They stopped, then ran down the hall toward the front of the house. My mind screamed at me to flee, but I was rooted in place, unable to decide whether to hide or run. The footsteps moved outside, crossing the gravel driveway, then fading into the distance as an engine roared to life and sped away. Silence descended once more. I crept to the hallway, heart hammering. The front door stood wide open, swaying in the night breeze. Outside, the cold mountain air cut like a knife, and the world was empty. No cars, no voices, no sign of the man with the glowing eyes. The next day, I reported the break-in to the nearest police station, 20 minutes away. The officers were polite but uninterested. Small town problems, they said. No signs of forced entry, no reports of anything suspicious. Their indifference was like a slap in the face. I never learned who the figure was, why he had come, or what he wanted. I packed up that morning and left, driving away from that forgotten place with a sense of relief mixed with lingering dread. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I swear I still see those eyes watching me from the darkness. Some places are better left undiscovered. Behind the scenes, my haunted past. I should explain why I chose such a remote, unwelcoming place for my vacation. I wasn't just running from boredom. I was running from myself. For years, I'd battled anxiety and depression. My life felt like a cage, a prison of routines and unspoken fears. This trip was supposed to be a cleansing, a chance to reconnect with nature, to find clarity away from the noise of my city life. But the isolation, instead of healing me, opened old wounds. The night in that cabin was the darkest I'd ever known. I'd never felt truly alone before, not in this way, not haunted by something unseen. The eyes at the window, the footsteps echoing down empty halls, the cold weight of invisible threats. It all felt like the darkness inside me had taken form. Was it real, or was it a nightmare conjured by my restless mind? I'll never know for sure, but I do know this. The terror I experienced wasn't just from some stranger lurking outside. It was from a place deeper, darker. A place inside me that no mountain air or pine-scented breeze could reach. I had been driving for days. The highway stretched endlessly behind me like a ribbon of exhaustion and monotony. My muscles ached. My eyes burned from hours on the road, and my mind was a restless whirlwind of deadlines and obligations waiting for me at my final destination. But before I could reach that place, I had to stop and rest. The exhaustion was overwhelming, but my stubbornness pushed me to keep going, to make this last stop before tomorrow's journey. I pulled off the main highway into a small town that seemed forgotten by time. The streetlights flickered dimly, casting weak halos on the cracked pavement. I had booked an Airbnb that was barely visible from the road, an old house standing silently among overgrown bushes and peeling paint. I didn't care much about the look of the place. I only wanted a bed, a few hours of uninterrupted sleep. Dragging my small backpack behind me, I approached the creaking wooden door. The air was thick and heavy, carrying the faint scent of damp wood and something else, something I couldn't quite place. I shook off the feeling and stepped inside. The house was dimly lit by a single yellow bulb hanging from the ceiling in the living room. Shadows clung to every corner like silent watchers. The furniture was old, worn, and smelled faintly of dust and neglect. I sniffed sharply, catching an unpleasant odor. It wasn't immediately alarming, but it was enough to make me wrinkle my nose. A strange, sour smell like mold or something decaying hidden beneath the floorboards. I glanced quickly around, my eyes trying to pierce through the shadows. The bedroom door stood slightly ajar. I hesitated, then peeked in. The smell was stronger here, thicker, more suffocating. I pulled back, deciding it wasn't the place for me to sleep. Instead, I dropped my backpack on the living room floor and settled on the couch, wrapping a thin throw blanket over me. As I started to relax, a sudden loud thump echoed through the walls. The sound was sharp, solid, too heavy to be the house simply settling. My heart jumped. I sat up, trying to pinpoint the source, but the noise seemed to vibrate through the very wood and plaster, impossible to locate precisely. It wasn't the kind of sound that gave away its origin. I stood and cautiously walked down the narrow hallway, peering into each room. Everything appeared normal, no broken furniture, no obvious signs of disturbance. The bathroom was empty, the small window closed tight. My mind raced, imagining all sorts of possibilities. Was it a loose shutter banging in the wind? Or maybe a branch scraping against the roof? But deep down, I knew something felt wrong. Returning to the couch, I told myself to ignore it. After all, I was only here for one night. Nothing could possibly harm me in such a short time, right? I pulled out my phone, hoping to distract myself with plans and messages. But just minutes later, another thump resonated through the house, identical to the first. It came from somewhere above or behind the walls, close enough to be terrifying but distant enough to remain a mystery. I jumped to my feet again, heart pounding hard against my ribs. I flicked on every light, scanning the walls and ceilings for signs of damage or a way inside. The attic hatch in the hallway caught my eye, closed but old and fragile. My skin prickled. I thought about calling the host, but what could I say? There's a strange noise, and I'm scared? It seemed ridiculous. I told myself to calm down. The rational part of my brain tried to dismiss it all as imagination fueled by exhaustion and the creepy ambience of this strange place. I turned off the lights and lay back down, pulling the blanket tighter around me. The night was eerily quiet after that, and despite the anxiety gnawing at me, exhaustion finally claimed me. Hours later, I woke suddenly. My eyes were still closed, but an instinctive unease stirred in my gut. Something was wrong. The air felt colder, heavier, as if the shadows themselves were watching me. I opened my eyes slowly. There, standing right above me, was a man. His face was blurred in the dim light, his eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that froze me in place. Time slowed, my breath caught, my body locked in a moment of pure terror. Then, in the blink of an eye, he sprinted past the side of the couch and out the front door. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering wildly. I ran after him, but he vanished into the darkness of the trees outside. Back inside, the silence was suffocating. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, trembling. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the attic ladder, folding down from the ceiling in the middle of the hallway. My throat tightened. He had been here in the attic. But why? How long had he been living here, hiding? I grabbed my phone and called the police, voice shaking. As I waited for help, my mind raced with possibilities. Was this man dangerous? Had he been watching me all night? Did he know I was coming? The police arrived quickly and searched the house. The attic was empty. No signs of habitation beyond a few scraps of trash and some old clothes. It seemed he had only been here briefly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the house itself was a trap, that the walls had secrets, watching, waiting. That night left a mark on me, an imprint of fear and confusion that stayed long after I left that forgotten house behind. Before this trip, I was already struggling with a growing sense of isolation. Work had taken me far from family and friends, and the long drives only intensified the loneliness. I was a person who liked control, who liked to feel safe and prepared. But here, in that eerie house, all my carefully constructed defenses crumbled. The strange noises and the shadowed figure forced me to confront my deepest fears. The vulnerability of being alone in a strange place, the fragility of human safety. I felt exposed, raw like prey. Why hadn't I trusted my instincts earlier? Why had I dismissed the warning signs? These questions haunted me. I realized that sometimes exhaustion and distraction can blind us to real danger. That complacency can be deadly. In the days that followed, I tried to find out more about the house and its previous tenants. The host was vague, unable to provide much information. Neighbors avoided eye contact or quickly changed the subject. Rumors whispered of a transient man who had been squatting there, a shadow lurking in the attic. No one knew his name, but some suspected he was dangerous. I imagined the attic as a dark lair, filled with secrets and forgotten memories. The thumps might have been him moving, restless, trapped between this world and something darker. Was he watching me, waiting for me to fall asleep? The house had a life of its own, a place where fear lingered in the air, where shadows moved just beyond sight. That night changed me. It was a reminder that even in our most mundane routines, the unexpected can strike, that the line between safety and terror is thin, and sometimes the things that go bump in the night are real.